Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Rare Disease Day 2023 Wrapped What You Need to Take Away. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. This presentation is in discussion and will include a Q&A session with our speakers at the end. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout this presentation by using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Worldwide Clinical Trials, who developed the content for this presentation. Worldwide Clinical Trials is a global mid-sized contract research organization that provides top-performing bioanalytical and phase 1 through 4 clinical development services to the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries. Founded in 1986 by physicians committed to advancing medical science, their full-service clinical experience ranges from early phase and bioanalytical sciences through late phase studies, post-approval, and real-world evidence. Major therapeutic areas of focus include cardiovascular, metabolic, neuroscience, oncology, and rare diseases. Operating in 60-plus countries with offices in North and South America, Eastern and Western Europe, and Asia, Worldwide is powered by its more than 3,000 employee experts. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host for today's great discussion. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Amy Raymond. She's a Senior Director of Therapeutic Strategy Lead, Rare Diseases with Worldwide Clinical Trials. And there she is. Hi, Amy. Amy has been a drug discovery and development professional for 20 plus years, including progressive roles in rare disease clinical operations and rare disease clinical strategy. Her clinical development experience spans all therapeutic areas and all stages of the clinical development life cycle, from natural history studies through inpatient phase 1 trials and long-term follow-up and post-marketing surveillance. So there's Amy. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host, Derek Ansel. He's the Executive Director of Therapeutic Strategy Lead, Rare Diseases with Worldwide Clinical Trials. And there's Derek. Hi, Derek. Derek has worked in clinical research for more than 10 years, with a focus almost exclusively in rare and pediatric diseases. At Worldwide, he leads and supports corporate initiatives with rare and pediatric diseases and maintains relationships with over 60-plus patient-focused advocacy organizations. Now, it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Amy and Derek so that they can introduce you to our panelists for today's great discussion. So, Amy and Derek, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sonia. First and foremost, huge thank you to our amazing panelists today, a collection of people we have known and admired for a lot of years, very busy movers of mountains, so thanks for making time to really come together, talk a little bit about what the conversation has been so far this year, giving us a chance to amplify the messages and keep the momentum going throughout 2023. So, kicking us off, first, Rob Long.
Hello, my name is Rob Long. I'm the Executive Director of Uplifting Athletes, and I am thrilled to be a part of the panel today.
Thanks so much, Rob. Next up, Richie.
Hello, Richie Khan. I am co-founder and principal at Canary Advisors, a rare disease patient myself. I am thrilled to be here today. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
We're so glad to have you. Next up, Jen.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm the other half of Canary Advisors, along with Richie, and I'm also the caregiver and mother to 2 adult sons with muscular dystrophy and a teen son with primary immune deficiency. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being part of the conversation today. The next rock star, Kyle.
Here I am. I'm Kyle Bryant. I'm the founder of Ride Ataxia, and I'm spokesperson for the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. And I have to be honest, I'm feeling a little out of my league with an esteemed panel like this. So I'm really looking forward to all the intelligent things people have to say.
You're not alone in that, Kyle. Me too, for that matter. Thanks. Last but certainly not least, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Christine Wagner. I'm the president and founder of the Cure GM1 Foundation for GM1 gangliosidosis. Sadly, my daughter Iris was diagnosed with GM1 at age 5. She's now 15. I look forward to talking with everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sonia, do we have a poll question?
Yes, we do. And I'm going to launch our poll question right now for our audience members to engage in. Now, remember, audience members, this is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And it's a simple poll question that we have for you. The question is, what type of organization are you affiliated with? So please go ahead and click on the below. Is it sponsor, patient advocacy organization, CRO, site, or other? I'll give you about 20 seconds to complete this poll question. And once it's done, I'll share the results and then we'll get right back into this great discussion. Okay, that looks like it's a majority of our audience have cast their votes. I'm going to leave a few more seconds for those of you who have not. It looks like you're doing it now, so a few more seconds there. Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'm now going to close the polls and let's take a look at the results. Okay, here are the results, everyone. In our audience, we have 30% that said sponsors, while 4% said patient advocacy organizations. We got 39% of our audience members saying CRO, while 0% said site, and 26% said other. So thank you, everyone, for participating in our only poll question. And now, before I pass the mic over to Amy and Derek, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about who we have in our audience today?
Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. So certainly a great mix. I think it's encouraging to see who the participants are from, especially from a CRO space. Can we be doing things a little bit better than we were last year in terms of engaging patients? And in particular for sponsors as well. Are there some things that our sponsors can take away from our panelists today that can help support their drug development pipeline and include patients in their rare disease portfolio? So I don't know if anyone else agrees with that with a head nod, but we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. Out of all of the activities that occurred during Rare Disease Month, week, day, it's quite a celebration. What was something that you found particularly encouraging or satisfying? Or what was a surprise? And before I steal any of Kyle's thunder, I will pass it to Kyle Bryant first. So Kyle, take it away.
Yeah, so Derek, as you may know, I was diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia in 1998, and like all of us, all we want is a treatment and a cure. And that was a long time ago. And on Rare Disease Day this year, just last week, 1 week ago, the very first treatment for Friedreich's ataxia was approved by the FDA. And so, you know, it was an amazing moment and it continues to be amazing for our community. But at the same time, we celebrate and we know there's still a lot of work to do. This is not, as most of us know, it's not one thing that's going to solve all the problems. And so we keep moving forward with the knowledge that we have and everything we've learned in the last 25 years and continue developing and coming up with better ideas and following everything until we improve the lives of every single person in our community.
Thanks, Kyle. Such exciting news. We had to have you kick things off for us and our panelists today because of the exciting news that you just mentioned that happened on Rare Disease Day. So with Kyle's comments, Christine, is there anything that you'd like to add around something that you found particularly encouraging or satisfying or surprising around Rare Disease Month, week, or day?
Well, I was, of course, very inspired by the approval for Friedreich's Friedreich's ataxia. But the thing that I found really interesting was the use of the FARA natural history and how much work the organization has put into that, and the fact that it was led by FARA in terms of putting that together. I think for our community, natural history continues to be a major issue, and data sharing. And actually for GM1, we're highly splintered across many natural history studies, whereas FARA, I think, is down to one, which is awesome and so important to have that huge data set and not have all these silos. So that's an aspect that I found incredibly inspiring as well.
Yeah, you know, let me add to that real quick. My colleague on our podcast, my colleague Sean Baumstark, he said, when's the right time to plant a tree? 1,000 years ago. This was a quote he was drawing from. When's the next best time? Today, right now. And that's an encouragement for natural history studies because, you know, in 1998, when I was diagnosed, and other people as well over the years, you know, a natural history study, that's not very sexy. That's not a treatment. That's not a cure. But today, it's like Christine was saying, it's our #1 asset that we have going into clinical trials. And so just an encouragement for anyone out there to start today.
It's a great reminder, Kyle. It's your currency, right? It's your way to bring a seat to the table in terms of a drug developer. Jen, pass it over to you for additional comments.
So I'm just going to continue on with what Kyle and Christine are saying, but I'm going to hang on Kyle's words because I remember the day that we had our first approval for Duchenne in 2016 of Exondys 51. And we say now, looking back, that we took about a half a second to celebrate and not even enough time to pop the champagne because we knew that that treatment would not be for everybody. We needed to already find the next best treatment, right? So as soon as one's approved, you got to be working on the next one. So with my sort of, what was I encouraged by is how far we've come with the FDA. As I was listening to Commissioner Califf, he made remarks directed to the rare disease community, and he emphasized the importance of patient engagement, the utility of the data that patients bring to the table based on their lived experience. He even articulated the thing that we all know, but it's so nice to hear him saying that no one knows what it's like to live with a rare disease better than us and better than the caregivers and patients engaged. He talked about our advocacy and the way that we advocate for treatments like nobody else can, and then went on to say that the FDA continues to have this drive to make sure that they incorporate patient perspectives and experiences into those reviews. So all of that was incredibly encouraging. We as a patient community know that that's true, but to hear that even those who have a product approved or those who are looking for a product approved, what's encouraging is that we're not just in a silo anymore, and that across all of the stakeholders, we are hearing that our views are the most important in the room. The other thing that I think that was exciting and surprising and encouraging was to see Rare on the Hill, the Every Life Foundation, back together in person. I will say that my family was dealing with COVID during that time, so we were not with them on the Hill. We were not able to go and be there in person, but it's always invigorating to see the pictures, to see the presence online, and to know that this presence has just been growing over the last 25 years that I've been part of this community. It's just amazing to see these communities growing and taking the Hill by storm.
I love that, taking the Hill by storm. Thanks, Jen. Rob, same question for you. Anything that was particularly encouraging, satisfying, insightful, or surprising throughout the month for Rare Disease Month, week, and day?
Sure. So I had a few things. One that I thought was really awesome that was led by Dr. David Feigenbaum and his organization EveryCure. They launched a roadmap for utilizing already FDA-approved treatments and repurposing them for people impacted by rare diseases and the community at large. And I think a lot of the work that he's done is really incredible, certainly for the Castleman's disease community, but the ability to put together this roadmap of options and opportunities to explore already approved therapies, because we know here that there are so many, the vast majority of rare diseases that do not have an FDA approved treatment. And we know the time that it takes for this to be approved, for therapies to be approved. So for him to take this challenge on with Everycure, I think was something that was really special. And that roadmap was something that was quite extraordinary. One of the other things that I had saw was there was a rare disease healthcare hub and rare journal that was published by Osmosis from Elsevier. And what this is really an open source journal for everything from white papers to documentation of treatments and care for rare diseases. And I think it's a really cool opportunity to create this resource hub. And they've done a great job with it. So that was something that popped up that I thought was really special. And finally, the last thing that I would add was the updated numbers from the NIH and NCATS that identified the 10,000 different rare diseases, over 10,000 different rare diseases. I think there's incredible power in understanding that number and the power of being counted. And the other side of that, the understanding that there's fewer than 500 FDA-approved treatments for those 10,000 different rare diseases. So for us, we realize that there's more rare diseases and fewer that have treatments, and understanding that we have a long way to go.
Thanks, Rob. Quite a bit there. Always, rare diseases, in particular, the celebration that we have throughout the month, as we all know, it's a great way to celebrate of how far we've come, but it's a great reminder of how far yet we have yet to go. So thank you for all of your insights, Rob. And last and certainly not least for this particular question, Richie, your final thoughts on what you found encouraging and satisfying throughout the month.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. And we'll keep it brief. As sad as it is to say, I was really excited to be at an in-person meeting last week. I had the privilege and pleasure of going to NIH for Rare Disease Day, and just the opportunity to reconnect with the community and also learn more about what regulatory authorities and other stakeholders were doing in rare was really exciting. In particular, there was a morning session about some initiatives at NCATS that could inform some of the work moving forward. There was a rare disease information center. They're rolling out a rare source integrated bioinformatics resource, which not a bioinformatics guy, but I sat there grinning and I was looking up my own condition on the web portal that they displayed on the screen. And I'm hopeful these resources are really impactful once they get rolled out later this year.
Great, thanks so much, Richie. Amy, I will pass it over to you for our next question.
Great, thank you so much. This is amazing. Like, you are people who we talk with often, we follow you closely. Like, you've raised so many points that weren't on my mind, so thank you. Keeping the conversation going sort of in that theme, tell us a little bit, what's an ongoing challenge that's a top priority, ongoing focus for your community or your organization this year? It could be clinical trials, it could be a specific one, it could be research, it could be policy. Where is your focus and attention primarily this year? I feel like I'm picking on you, but again, I'll go to Rob Long.
Sure. So I think for us, we as an organization, Uplifting Athletes, we have a large emphasis on the next generation and supporting and funding the next generation of rare disease researchers. As I had previously stated, that we have fewer than 500 treatments for the over 10,000 rare diseases. And really, the only way that we can solve this long term is by making this investment today. I love Kyle's analogy of when to plant the tree. And for us, we started this Young Investigator Draft program back in 2018, and the idea was to provide seed funding for these researchers to get started, to have the ability to collect that initial data set so that the ball could be rolling, that research could be funded within these different disease states, sometimes ultra rare disease states. And one of the things that I think we're most proud of as an organization is that since this organization started the Young Investigator Draft in 2018, we've been able to partner with 33 different patient advocacy organizations to fund 44 different researchers and over $820,000 in rare disease research. And that's just us getting started, right? And it's one organization trying to plant a stake and say that we need to make a different future for those that are currently living with rare diseases. And the only way that we can do that is by getting started. So for us is trying to accomplish this really difficult task of trying to get more treatments to market for people in the rare disease community.
Well, it's an important mission. Every year, you guys impress me even more than the one before. I know I say that to you each time. I'm interested in hearing from additional folks around the horn. So, Richie, what's on your mind this year?
Yeah, very well said, Rob. So a couple of things I'm thinking about. They're not fun, they're not sexy. Numbers, math, odds, statistics here. So from my 13 years in research, I think a lot about numbers, the 10 to 12 years it takes to bring a new product to market, the $2.6 billion, and the fact that for every 10,000 investigational therapies that are, not even investigational therapies yet, they're in drug discovery, one makes it out. So recognizing the odds are not in our favor, recognizing there's a lot of effort and there's a lot of waste here, I try to think, what can we do to make use of the finite resource pool, the finite talent pool, to inform other indications that perhaps are under-resourced and underserved. So thinking about rare and thinking about ophthalmology, where my passions really intersect, I think a lot about gene therapy and the work that Spark Therapeutics was doing for Luxturna. For those that are not familiar, Luxturna was the first ophthalmic gene therapy here. It's really focused on a particular form of Leber's congenital amaurosis, a really rare and kind of niche form of vision loss. And as promising as Luxturna is for patients with LCA, what excites me the most is the potential to repurpose a lot of that knowledge gained for things like Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. So there's so much avenue to take what we've learned from one indication or therapeutic area to drive research forward in other indications. So we can avoid that waste. We can see some more efficiencies. The last thing I'll mention related to ophthalmology here, continuing the work for vision restoration, the Glaucoma Research Foundation has a group called Catalyst for a Cure, and they work to drive science forward to restore vision irrespective of the source of vision loss. So I just think a lot of excitement about ways to repurpose some of this knowledge gained in one indication into another for the good of patients.
Awesome. Yeah, numbers may not feel sexy, but they sure are powerful, especially when used in the ways that you described. Thanks so much, Richie. Kyle, let's hear a little bit about what's on your mind this year.
Yeah, so one of the big challenges, I think, for our organization as we do more and realize there's more to do, our vision sort of expands as we move along. I think a lot of us are experiencing that as we move in rare disease. But one of the big challenges for us is international. And we're excited about the challenge, just expanding to the international community. We've always funded worldwide research all around the world, but our patient community is obviously worldwide too. And, that comes with a lot of challenges, like simply time zones. Like, that's honestly a big challenge. And then there's culture and economics and all kinds of challenges, right? And so that's just something that we think a lot about and we put a lot of effort in, because we know that there is a lot of payoff when we try to include every single person in the world who has Friedreich's ataxia into our community.
That's awesome. That's a great goal. Thank you, Kyle. Jen, how about you for this year?
Sure. Well, we don't even have time to talk about everything I'm focused on this year. But what I will say on a personal note is lately in my career and in my volunteer work, I'm trying to bring it home and remember what person I was when I got into this, and realizing that what brought me into this, what brought my voice forward, was when Max got into a clinical trial that Austin didn't qualify for. That is what launched me into this world, to figure out why, figure out how, raise my voice about how well Max was doing and how far Austin was declining. And so I think if I'm to ground myself, we're still not doing a good enough job creating clinical trials that cast a wide enough net to make sure that we're capturing all of the limited people that are in this community, whether it's Duchenne whether it's Huntington's disease, whether it's arginase 1 deficiency, whether it's sickle cell disease. We have to do a better job making sure that when we do create clinical trials, that we create as many arms as possible for those that use clinical trials as a treatment option, for those that review clinical trials and approve clinical trials and label those drugs for use post-commercialization. Broad labels need broad testing, right? And for market access, right? We still know that we struggle to get access for drugs outside of that studied population. And so one of the biggest challenges is how do we do that? And so it's things like novel endpoints and figuring out how do we measure success in guys that only have use of their hands, right? It's thinking about how do we make these trials accessible? And I know we're going to talk about that, but thinking about these older guys who have a harder time, who are non-ambulatory, how are they getting to trial sites? Is there a way to reduce burden? And then thinking about my good friends in the Huntington's disease world, what about pre-symptomatic population? We're really interested in testing people and newborn screening, all of really important things, genetic testing. We're really encouraging people to find out, but what do you do when you find out and you can't be part of research, right? Imagine how devastating that is. So, you know, something that I work to solve in whatever ways possible are casting a wider net and making sure that if you are interested in research, you can participate in research. And so, you know, that's also a call to action. I saw that we had some CROs and sponsors on the line. So make it accessible to everybody, make it possible for everybody, and we got to work together to figure that out.
Jen, thank you for raising your voice, for sending that message just now. It's just a universal truth. Thank you. Hard act to follow, but Christine, what are some topics that are focused for your organization and community this year?
Well, so last year we unfortunately had 2 clinical trials in gene therapy shut down, where the companies had been impacted by the financial climate. And so we're seeing this across the rare disease community, where clinical trials and programs are being shelved, and it's devastating. And this problem of scalability to these 10,000 rare diseases, and to the fact that, well, trials are experimental, and so you can't expect every single one to survive so necessarily, which is an unfortunate truth, but you have to have more than one egg in the basket, and we did have more than one egg, and we're glad we still have some trials going. But when your disease is ultra rare, every single program is so important. And so that is a major area of consideration, is continuing to try to feed the pipeline to ensure that there will be programs to come. And in gene therapy in particular, those patients who were dosed and where redosing was not a consideration, it is difficult for people to come to terms with that they will not be accepted to any other clinical trial for the rest of their lives. And I think that is something that people really need to think about, is the redosing strategy. And I would totally agree with Jen on the accessibility. In terms of our disease, particularly in these gene therapies, the criteria are being tightened so much that I kind of wonder how they're going to be enrolled without newborn screening other than pre-symptomatic siblings. And we are an ultra rare disease, so finding that many pre-symptomatic siblings can be difficult. I think with newborn screening, it's a completely archaic system. With the issue of chicken before the egg, our disease is primarily infantile, over 60%. So we need to find the children super rapidly. And also we need to be able to accommodate the older families and keep them engaged in participating in research and natural history. They need to be included in the whole research process, and in order for them not to walk away and disengage completely.
Well said, very well said. Thank you, Christine. Derek, let's move the conversation on.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think we're addressing this question quite well already. I think with Jen mentioning, making it accessible for everyone, Christine with redosing, newborn screening, I think can be a wholly separate webinar where we talk and pick apart newborn screening. But this is a question really around kind of what you just mentioned, but potentially with the unique personal focus or community focus. So is there one area within rare disease that clinical developers or sponsors should focus on throughout 2023? Is this something that you heard during the NIH discussion or the FDA discussion or at some event during Rare Disease Week? If so, please feel free to mention it. And if not, let us know why it should be a priority for our sponsors in 2023. And Jen, you kind of probably addressed some of this, so I will start it off with you. Around your focus areas for 2023.
Sure. So, I think I give directives every time I speak about anything, but I think that the most important thing that sponsors can do is know that they're not starting from scratch, right? So in my professional life, we work with a lot of rare disease sponsors, and they don't need to recreate the wheel. So listening and finding ways to incorporate the voices of all the stakeholders into a plan, right, that really gives drugs the best chance for success. So I'm hoping in 2023, it's the year where everything comes together. The FDA is a very important stakeholder and they give directives. Patients are really intimate parts of the design of these clinical trials. So engaging earlier and more often, we've been saying it for years. I hope this is the year we do it. And then KOLs, just understanding that in order to have a successful product, you need a patient that wants it, you need a doctor that wants to prescribe it, you need an agency that's going to approve it, and you need a payer that's going to pay for it. And so if you talk with all of the stakeholders very early on and kind of lay that path, then the people who participate in your clinical trials are doing so with the best chance of having a successful product launch. So that's really my hope for this year. It's a small thing. It's a small thing, small ask.
Thanks, Jen. No, something we see is on a wish list for every year, right? But to what you said, hopefully 2023 is the year that we all come together. So thank you for that reminder. Coming off of Jen's heels, Kyle, what are your thoughts on what should sponsors, drug developers focus on for the rest of the year?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be solved in a year, but I want to build off something that Jen said earlier, just about, inclusion and labeling. I think we all know that diversity is a big, big deal right now. And in general, not just right now, but it always will be. And I think part of that I think about particularly right now is age. And that's because our clinical trial was for people over the age of 16. And there's a lot of kids that are, under 16, right, in our community. And so that's weighing heavily on, on all of our hearts. And I think it's just an issue that we need to keep continually talking about and finding solutions to make sure we serve all the people who are, under the ages that are on these labels, or being able to push the clinical trials even lower so we can expand the labels.
Yeah, so important. So powerful, right? To consider you know your communities the best, right? And in particular with genetic conditions, there are a number of children and adolescents who are not eligible because of their ages. So it's a good reminder for us throughout 2023. Richie, your additional thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah, trying to pull together a couple things that Kyle just said and that Jen mentioned as well. Thinking about accessibility and patient-focused drug development, right? So if you are a drug developer, if you're a CRO partnering with a rare disease pharma, it's really, really, really in everybody's interest to make sure that you understand to the best of your ability unmet needs, quality of life impacts, patient preferences. So that clinical trial design is aligned for what patients actually want and need. For sure, you've got to make sure that the trial is something that sites want to recruit for, that the regulatory authorities are on board with, absolutely. But it's really, really frustrating when you see a protocol get amended 4, 5, 6 times, and you look at it and you find out that the outcomes of interest aren't meaningful to patients. The burdens and barriers we are putting up inadvertently are keeping patients that are highly motivated from participating. So, it's not only critically important to have these conversations at the beginning, hopefully before you're even in the clinic, but to make sure that you're continuing to have this dialogue, this engagement throughout drug development, hopefully commercialization, right? Because just because the first in human was a good fit doesn't mean that we're not inadvertently making the phase 2, phase 3 protocols way more complicated than they need to be, or more complicated and burdensome than patient communities will bear. So that would be my hope for 2023, that we all work together for patient-focused drug development here to reduce some of that inefficiency and to increase our likelihood of success across the board.
I love that, Richie. Thank you. I know we have a question. We have a separate question on accessibility and, of course, diversity later in the panel today. I think we heard a lot about decentralized trials or decentralized clinical trials during Rare Disease Week. So hopefully we can loop that into our accessibility question as well in terms of what has gone well in terms of DCTs, decentralized clinical trials, and what might not have gone so well in that space. So we'll earmark that for that discussion. But Christine, what are your goals for sponsors to pivot their focus for the remainder of the year? Anything that comes to mind?
I think, I mean, for us, we're constantly looking at pre-competitive collaboration and this issue of natural history data sharing. We hear people all the time say, don't worry, I'll share. And that's not enough. The words aren't enough. The actions are what matters. Signing on the dotted line is what matters, and actually showing that you are meaningfully collaborating and sharing. So I think we're working with our KOLs, our companies, everyone involved in our space to continue to move towards action as opposed to just words. And I totally agree about the broader labels. I think with certain rare diseases, such as GM1 gangliosidosis, that we have, it gets rarer as like the infantile form is the most common. So some people don't even think it would ever be realistic to have an adult onset trial. So if you can't do that, then I mean, if there was a magical day, and I sure hope there will be, where a drug is approved for GM1, I really hope that those adults who are ultra rare will someday have the opportunity of having a treatment, because they absolutely should if our hallmark biomarkers and are actually being addressed. So flexibility on the label and for these populations, I think, is really important.
Thanks, Christine. I really like your comment around data sharing. I think, Rob, you mentioned David, who always says turn hope into action. So Christine, you're really reminding us that it's one thing just to say it, but it's really, we need to get signing on the dotted line and really becoming more actionable with our words. It's so important for these communities. Speaking of, Rob, any additional thoughts or comments on focus points from your organization or from your community for 2023?
Yeah, so this one's a little bit more personal than probably most of the other answers I'll give, but I think placing an emphasis or a focus on the mental health of the trial participants is something that's really important. I think for me, I was somebody that was diagnosed with a rare aggressive form of brain cancer and went through an extensive amount of treatment. And the day came where I was incredibly fortunate to no longer be showing signs of cancer, and that was great, except for the fact I didn't feel great. And so it took almost 8 years for me to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from my diagnosis. And for me, I think it's really important that we really think about treating the whole person and not just the symptom or diagnosis they went in with. And so for me, like, being able to focus on the mental health of the people in our rare disease community is something that's incredibly important to me. And I know there's organizations like Global Genes that have done some good work of putting out of grants for organizations that were placing emphasis and resources towards mental health. So I know there's things that are happening in the community, but I would love for this to be a part of the clinical trial process of really treating the whole person and ensuring that their well-being is being looked after.
Thanks, Rob. So important. I think we shy away from the discussion around mental health. I think what we've seen here worldwide is that some sponsors really considering the use of just talking about mental health awareness, mental health support for participants in a clinical trial. We've had some sponsors say, well, we'll add another scale, and that's not what we're talking about here. But I think at least having the conversation is not something that we've seen years ago. So we are seeing that needle move in a positive direction, I think, for mental health and mental health support for rare disease patients, and hopefully broader for all patients as well as they enroll in a trial. So it's a good reminder. Amy, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great, thank you. Great conversation so far on concepts and so forth, but as we look into the crystal ball for the year ahead, I'm curious to know what are some important events for each of you in your communities in the year ahead? Turning back to Christine, are there any important events that your family or your community are focused on this year?
We'll be focusing on, I mean, it's a bit selfish, but we'll be focusing on our conference. I mean, it's just a monumental task every single year, and it's so important to connect with each other and to really make that concerted effort. I think the difficulty is I think it will even be more complex now because the expectation is that we'll have a hybrid conference because everyone's like, well, I mean, it is amazing to see everyone from around the world participating, but it's gonna make it extra elaborate. So in terms of the in-person, I'm really looking forward to seeing people again.
No doubt. It is a little complex, though, trying to make sure that we take the best things from the way we've been working the last couple of years and carry them forward. But in some ways, it makes it twice as hard. We're hoping for twice the dividends, right? On that same topic, Rob, what are some high priority events for yourself and your community this year?
So I have a couple that I'm really looking forward to. One is actually out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, called the Professional Patient Advocacy and Life Sciences Conference. It's a phenomenal opportunity for really educational and networking opportunities in the life sciences community and understanding the role that patient advocacy plays in that. And so for me, it's something that I always look forward to going out to Sioux Falls each year. And then from an uplifting athlete standpoint, one of the things that we have put forth as part of our health equity initiative is really meeting researchers from all backgrounds where they are. So that means for us going out and speaking on campus to researchers about the opportunities that exist, not only within uplifting athletes, but really the rare disease community, and sharing with them the ecosystem that exists. And really for us, trying to draw these researchers towards the rare disease community and kind of letting them know that they can go be the 10,000th researcher in breast cancer and heart disease, which is a noble thing, or they can be the first. They can be a pioneer in one of these disease states that need somebody to take this on. And so for us, we're trying to find those people that are willing and up for the challenge. So those are the things that I'm really looking forward to this year.
Sounds like another busy year.
Yeah.
Terrific. Not that you're any less busy. Kyle, how about you?
I am looking forward to Ride Ataxia this year. We've got 4 events throughout the country, and then I think something that we're all always thinking about is trying to include as many people as possible. And so this year, for the first time, we're launching what's called Ride Ataxia Hometown. We have a lot of people that contact us and say, hey, you should come do a ride in our town. And now we can say, all right, how will you do it? And we'll come celebrate with you, you know? And so I'm really excited to go out to our 4 main events and see the community. As Christine was alluding to earlier, it's just so important to be face to face with people, and then, you know, see how Ride Ataxia Hometown goes, to see what people can do in their own communities.
Yeah, very grassroots. That's a really great way to get everybody involved. It's brilliant. Thank you, Kyle. Jen, I cringe to even ask you this because I know how busy you are, but if you had to pick priority events this year, what would they be?
So I'm going to throw everybody for a loop because I didn't say it in my intro, and I'm going to steal Richie's thunder because I know he wants to talk about it, but we absolutely both can. So in addition to all the stuff that we do, my sons, Austin and Max and James and I all run a nonprofit called One Rare, and that organization serves young adults living with rare diseases. It's not involved in drug development or advocacy on the Hill. It's really focused on embracing these young people who were not given a life expectancy into adulthood. And so the world has not been prepared for them. So we actually launched in 2020. We were supposed to have our very first in-person event. As you can imagine, like Christine mentioned, that went fully virtual and has been pretty fully virtual with a quick trip last summer. So we're hoping to have our first in-person, fully in-person event at the end of July this year in Massachusetts. We don't have our information up yet, but stay tuned. But I'm really excited about that, bringing these young adults together. And really, I've been working on handing the reins over to the young adults this year. My two sons that are handling things, Austin's 24, and then funny enough, if you get a sponsor request, it'll be from James, who's our resident grant writer, who is 15. So I'm really proud of these kids and how they're taking over this responsibility. And I'm excited to see some of our sponsors, some of our supporters. Rob has been a participant, and really see these kids get together. So very excited about that. The other thing that I'm hopeful and excited about is about gene therapy in drug development. Duchenne has the potential to have the first approved gene therapy this year. And so I'm going to look forward to that as a rare disease event, because I would be absolutely thrilled. Thank you, Kyle, for the Dan's Raise the Roof. I will be absolutely doing that, and asking folks to celebrate with me, because being part of these approvals is just amazing. And it was something I never thought I'd be a part of.
It is amazing. It absolutely is. Thanks, Jen. Well, she stole some of your thunder, Richie, but what else? What else on your mind?
Yeah, she certainly did. Jen neglected to mention some of the specifics. So that One Rare Experience event in Boston will be the end of July, more soon, but it's all about bringing together the community of young adults impacted by rare around education, recreation, and peer support. I will be there. I'm looking forward to it. 1 month beforehand, though, I'm looking forward to visiting Boston as part of DIA, but in particular, I'm looking forward to the SISGRIP Medical Heroes 5K. I ran it last year in my blind guy vest with a well-intentioned running guide, Amy, who decided that asking the blind guy to lead him to the race course and back was a good idea. My good friend Ryan Haynes from CSSI wound up running 10 miles that day. But this year I'm doing it with another thoughtful, well-intentioned running guide, Jen's son, Austin. Austin will be my guide. I will be pushing his race wheelchair. He will have no mercy, so I'm hopeful it will be my fastest blind guy 5K to date. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to talking accessibility. And the last event I'll mention just in a couple weeks in Philadelphia, the Rare Disease Innovation and Partnering Summit. I'm really looking forward to David Rose's keynote on Life with Rare and the session about building partnerships between advocacy and industry. So some good stuff coming up.
Sounds like great stuff. You had plenty of thunder. That combination of you and Austin, what a powerful combination, right? That is the best of both. Everybody bringing the thing that they're uniquely good at. That's amazing. Hopefully it'll be less than 10 miles. All right, thanks everyone. Back to you, Derek.
Thanks, Amy. Probably a good reminder. I'm sure you're already doing it, but for each of those events, please share on your social media. I think all of our participants would like to learn a little bit more. So if you do share that throughout the coming months, I think there'll be some interest for those events. So please do so. So continuing the theme of the future in 2023, maybe even forward thinking, is really how the conversation of rare disease research has evolved. I think we can all think of the time when patient centricity first came out, where we talked about gathering patient insights, then things like lay language summaries, natural history studies, data currency. There's a laundry list of things that we can talk about in terms of the conversation of rare disease research. first question is kind of where are you seeing that evolving? You might have alluded to that already in your prior responses. What conversations around Rare Disease Month, week, and day have really caught your attention on that conversation changing throughout the year? And what might be exciting or what might not be so exciting? We've used the words quite a bit. This is probably not too sexy. So maybe you can allude a little bit more on that for where you're seeing that conversation changing throughout the year. So Kyle, I will start it with you.
So this makes me think of the reception I attended. NORD celebrated 40 years of the Orphan Drug Act this year, and the room was packed, and it was like elbow to elbow in there. It was so cool. And you know, we've all been in this game quite a while, and to me, 10 years ago, I don't think that room would have been packed. And there were people from the NIH and NCATS and the FDA and all kinds of lawmakers and stuff. And of course, I was there with Mr. Ron Bartek. And so he was talking to everybody, and everybody was so receptive and dialed in, and they knew all the issues in the rare disease community. And I actually don't even know if this is answering your question, but I wanted to say that, you know, we've come so far, and it's just exciting to see where we've come from, because I think that makes the future bright. So yeah, that's all.
No, it certainly does answer the question. I think it provides a good amount of inspiration, excitement, energy, and hope for all rare disease communities when you're seeing just a full room, right? A full number of attendees showcases just the enthusiasm and energy for rare disease research. Rob, I'm going to ask you the same question. Something that kind of caught your attention, might be exciting, might not be exciting, that you're hearing from the conversation of rare disease research.
Sure. So I think what's been interesting is kind of this evolution. Talked about like patient centricity, and now the conversation is more of like patient-led research. And I think that's kind of as these terms continue to evolve, I think we're getting closer and closer to the core idea of how important the people that are impacted by these diseases actually are in this conversation. And so one of the things that we've kind of learned, and as we've developed our Young Investigator Draft program at Uplifting Athletes, you know, one of the things that makes that program so unique is that it's not a traditional opportunity for a researcher just to apply for a grant. It's actually them to be nominated by a patient advocacy organization and to collaborate on that application process. And the idea from the beginning was really to ensure that researchers were armed with the information that these patient advocacy organizations possessed, that they had the opportunity to connect and understand the top priorities for the patients in that community, and then be able to design and shift their research to align with that. And so for us, this is one of those things that continuing to try and focus on that patient voice and humanizing the work that these researchers are doing is so vitally important. And I know Christine talked about, you know, her conference coming up this year. These disease-specific patient advocacy organization conferences are so vital to really those communities getting together, but they're also amazing opportunities for researchers to be a part of, so that they can meet the people impacted and that they can understand the impact that they can have for those in that community. And so one of the things that we're doing at Uplifting Athletes that we launched this year was a travel research program that provides funding for researchers to attend these patient-family conferences in the rare disease space. It's one of the things that is so important in this development process. And so our hope is that we can fund these researchers to go to these patient-family conferences, meet the people in the community, understand the impact that they can have, and then come to us hopefully the next year, and those can jointly apply for a Young Investigator grant. So for us, it's this idea of humanizing the work that needs to be done in the rare disease space, and hopefully that is what drives these researchers to find progress within these disease states.
Wow, thanks, Rob. Really what you're doing, it seems like you're creating a funnel, right, of new rare disease researchers, but advocates in their particular industry or field of interest. So that's amazing that you're kind of creating a pathway of a variety of different events and supportive techniques to create that enthusiasm in a younger generation. So that's fantastic. Christine, Rob mentioned you just a second ago. Would like to pass it over to you as well.
So a couple times recently, I've had the privilege of talking to Emil Kakis about his ideas about Orphan Drug Act 2.0. And so I think, you know, it's great, of course, to celebrate the 40 years ago, those 40 years ago. So we need to like continually reinvent and keep on moving. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that's so exhausting about rare diseases, there's so many dimensions. It's so interesting, but it's also exhausting that we need to function in so many directions, that there's so many issues. And so in terms of our own disease and Orphan Drug Act 2.0, the issue we're really looking at is this neurodegenerative disease in a pediatric population where the expectation is that you're having to get to these children so early, and the notion that you're going to have age-matched natural history to pre-symptomatic children that aren't getting diagnosed is almost ridiculous. So you have to have there has to be some regulatory flexibility in terms of how we address that issue. Of course, we do have natural history studies. They've been going on for decades. They're not in the pre-symptomatic population really, unless there's like a couple pre-symptomatic siblings peppered in there. So we're looking for that major change. And I recently read an article in the New York Times about Anthony Fauci's influence and the birth of patient advocacy with respect to HIV. And you look at the chart of the explosion of drugs that there were and how he collaborated with those HIV advocates, there was a major change. And we're looking for something similar to that for rare diseases. That we need explosive change, really. So that's the thing. Maybe Orphan Drug Act 2.0, 3.0 forward. We just have to keep on going.
Yeah, no, I think Christine, you brought up a really good point about it being exhausting. I think there's a wide range of emotions when it comes to rare disease research. Hope, inspiring, enthusiastic, of course, they're all positive, but to the discussion we had about mental health there's so much prioritization, and really as a small, nimble organization, that list gets longer and longer and longer as the years progress, and the need for funding increases as well. So again, probably a conversation for another day is really how to set meaningful prioritization. I know Global Genes has done quite a bit, as Rob mentioned, supporting groups to really refine or craft or develop very narrow priority focuses for their organization. But still, I think we hear your sentiment quite a bit, Christine, within the community, that this is hard and this is tiresome and frustrating and involves a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And again, although we can celebrate for Rare Disease Day, week, and month, there's still so much more that we all need to be supporting. So thank you for that reminder, Christine. Richie, what are your thoughts around the conversation change for rare disease research from years prior to where we are today?
Yeah, I think most of the sentiments I was going to voice have been raised already, which is fantastic. So just to echo a few, I have definitely seen some movement 2022 starting to 2023. I hope to see it continued later on throughout the year. You know, for focusing on, as Rob and Christine both mentioned, mental health, supporting patients, but also supporting caregivers involved in trials, right? Because when we talk about rare disease, so often there is a caregiving component. And so often it is 24/7. I was listening to, I forget what the podcast was the other day, but they were talking about, it was caregivers in CLL is what it was. And the advice that someone mentioned is, you know, you really have to focus on yourself and take a breath. And I laughed out loud because, yeah, it's great advice, but a lot of caregivers don't have a moment. They can't take a breath. So understanding that and really thoughtfully trying to incorporate that reality into drug development and making sure we're not asking caregivers to do things like log seizures as soon as they happen when their kid's having 50 to 100 of them a day, right? That doesn't do anything to support the caregiver's mental health or good data collection. So hoping we keep that in mind moving forward and focus on mental health, not only in rare, but in all therapeutic areas and indications.
Yeah, so such an important reminder, Richie, especially around the caregiver and enrolling. When you enroll a rare disease patient, you're enrolling the entire family. So that's so important. Jen, over to you for your thoughts on the same question.
So I'm going to first piggyback on the, Richie, I think, has a great understanding about caregivers because I complain consistently over, the last dozen years or so, my entire family has either been in an interventional study that required travel, an observational study that requires travel. Both of my younger kids have been healthy controls in various studies for Duchenne. And in fact, James and Nora, my two youngest, are about to start a clinical trial for the brain in healthy teens and tweens locally. And all of that is exhausting, right? We know it's important, but it's exhausting. So my hope is that the conversation gets real, continues to get real, but where research becomes human and where people think, your clinical trial is my life. And so when caregivers and patients are being asked to jump through these hoops, it's not a finite time period. I fully recognize that my children and I will be part of clinical trials for the rest of our lives. And so we really have to work on building trials into lifestyles and understanding that you need to make sure that things are easy. The other piece is that it's a privilege to be me. It's a privilege to be able to participate in clinical trials. I can raise my hand every time something interests me, every time I see something, because I have such flexibility, because I have access to internet and vehicles and credit cards. But we need to move to a place where that's not the case. And so I think research is going to start looking, we're going to run out of people, which is great in certain indications, but we're going to have to start being exciting, being interesting, and reaching into the world of places where people are not clamoring to be in clinical trials. And we're going to have to get a whole lot more sexy about it. My good friend Gunnar Esiason has started the important discussion around paying people. It's super controversial. But guess what? This brain study that my kids are doing, they're getting paid for that. None of the muscular dystrophy trials where there were biopsies and surgeries did kids get paid for their participation. So I'm excited to see where that discussion goes because I think it's really important. Everybody else has a return on their investment, but we're literally sacrificing our lives and our children's bodies to be part of these studies. So compensation shouldn't be off the table. And then kind of last thing, I'm such an FDA geek that I'm always going to bring in an FDA component, right? I pay attention. I don't know all the lingo, but I get excited when I hear things like massive reorg, right? So we're undergoing massive reorganization. We're undergoing, job shifting and title changes. And all with the hope, when we hear these leaders, they sound excited. Peter Marks is very excited when he was talking at a conference I was in person at, where he can't wait to see what happens. And he's pushing his team and his divisions to become more progressive and to do more and to work harder and to be easier to work with and more flexible. And so I'm excited to see where that goes. Speed and innovation is really important to me. And so knowing that regulators are seeing it, they're hearing us, and they're reorganizing to meet us where we are is exciting to me too. But I'll echo that Christine is right. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to pay attention. It's exhausting to share voices. It's exhausting to schlep to Norfolk, Virginia every few months. All of it is tiring. So we hope that the return on that investment yields something for somebody.
So well said. I can't wait to go back through the recording. I think you've all said very inspiring quotes. And Jenna, what I got out of yours was get real. And I think that checks a lot of boxes when we think about all the issues that we've discussed today and concerns and, again, excitement for the year. But I really like a lot of the quotes and things that you've all been referencing. Amy, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you. My brain's reeling from taking it all in. On the topic of getting real, like that return on investment that Jen, you just referenced. I mean, everybody here in this virtual room, but really like people across the industry, across various stakeholder groups, that point where we're changing the standard of care for the better, right? And it's not just the regulatory approval. We've touched on it a couple of times. It's accessibility, right? How do we help ensure that participant families, but even non-participant families, eventually have access to a medication once it's deemed safe and effective? So, I mean, the broad question is, how is it being addressed? But it's also, how can we do better? An issue dear to all of our hearts, and really fundamental to most of the stakeholder groups we talk about. Richie, I'll turn to you first. You know, how do we address it? How do we do better?
Yeah, so thinking about accessibility in clinical trials, I'd say if there's been one silver lining to the pandemic as it relates to research, we have recognized that the traditional way of conducting programs, recruiting patients, not the only way, not the best way, right? Early 2020, a lot of biopharmaceutical sponsors, whether by choice or by force, had to start thinking about various modalities to make their programs either temporarily fully decentralized or at least hybridized moving forward. And I am hopeful that we will continue with that thoughtfulness about flexibility for clinical trials, how to make participation easier. You know, thinking about myself, right? Very selfishly, blind guy hat on again here, Amy. I live 4 blocks from Duke University Medical Center. I don't drive because I can't accurately read an intersection anymore. You don't want me to drive. There is no sidewalk. It is not a fun 4-block journey to Duke if you make it. And Duke, you know, bless their hearts is the Southern term. They're an academic medical center. They are inflexible. So if I want to participate, I have to find a ride, which is surprisingly hard in North Carolina. I have to probably bug someone to take off work to drive me. And that's just going to Duke. If I'm going to go see my KOL in St. Louis, that's a dog sitter, a house sitter, ride to and from the airport, and hopefully someone to help me navigate from the front door of the AMC into the clinic, right? But when I think about accessibility more broadly, it takes a lot of different forms. So we talked about access to actual clinical trials. We know in the US, 70-some% of potential participants live more than 2 hours away from a clinical trial site. How do we bring research to them, whether it's aided by technology, mobile clinical trial sites? We've got a lot of options there, while also recognizing technology is not a silver bullet. When we're talking about clinical trial design, Austin, I think about the guy constantly. He taught me something several years ago, which I still think about at least several times a week. You know, when we're talking about thoughtful use of technology here, it's great. We can talk telemedicine, PROs, all this good stuff. But are you asking someone who conceivably doesn't have the grip strength to hold a pen for a wet ink signature? If so, why? Right? So accessibility takes many forms. It's actually getting involved in research. It's being able to contribute data in a meaningful way to you. You know, if there is technology, it's making sure that dedicated high-speed Wi-Fi or sensors, devices, and wearables that are required are not out of reach. And then it's making sure the study design and the assessments are not only appropriate given the patient population, but making sure all patient-facing materials are accessible, free of jargon, culturally appropriate, and running this material by patients first.
Awesome. Wow, that was a lot to chew on, but I can't argue with any of it, because making those studies attractive, not just because, gosh, we don't have a treatment, but there needs to be more to it than that. Making them sustainable, because if you start a trial and then your life collides with it, who's benefiting? Not much. And then all of those things, you've hit on a lot of important points, because I think we'd all like to see drug development move faster. Some of it is how many participants can you find within that small radius, as you're saying. So all great points. I feel like we still have a lot of work to do in those hybrid decentralized technologies. I'm hoping that they're just sort of still a little bit of a gangly teenager, that we'll get better with them and apply them more smartly. Jen, I know this is something your family deals with day in, day out. You know, how do we make them more accessible? You have thoughts, you've touched on them. Say more.
Sure. You know, I love it when Richie quotes my son. He's actually doing his own consulting work around accessibility because he's spent a lot of years either as the sibling of or as the participant himself, but really thinking about, you know, thinking outside the box. Just to give a few examples, you know, when you're working with a clinical trial site and you're scheduling assessments, we all know that there's a window, right? There's this window where the data needs to be collected, and that's important. It matters. But thinking about scheduling and with families and trying to take time off and trying to get a babysitter, I'm running into silly things like sites that can't schedule more than 2 months out, right? They can't get us an appointment more than 2 months out. Or maybe they're inflexible with the type of flight that they're willing to provide. And so we're changing planes, right? And I don't know anybody who's a wheelchair user, changing planes doesn't work for us. And we get real grumpy. Even really nice people like me get real grumpy in the middle of the night when we're told that the wheelchair doesn't fit on the next plane. And so those are the kinds of things that are really difficult. So some of those things you can solve for, but some of them you can't. And so one of the things that Richie and I are looking at doing and kind of getting a lot of interest in is providing people to help. You know, some of the times that I had good experiences in clinical trials are times that could have been a disaster, except there was a person that wanted to help. And an example of that we like to share is very early on in a clinical trial. We arrived into the airport in Ohio, and I had a kid in a wheelchair, and it was the middle of the night, and our ride didn't show up. And luckily, the nurse Candy, actually had given me her phone number. And so she and her husband showed up with a makeshift ramp and a minivan with the seat pulled out of it and managed to get my kid in there, get us to the hotel. But not everybody has a nurse Candy. And so we're proposing things like concierge staffed by people like us, people who know that it's important and people that can actually troubleshoot and help you, because you're not going to ever eliminate all of the issues, and you're not going to ever anticipate all of the issues. But sometimes people like us just want somebody there to, whether it's Richie, meet you at the door and bring you into the clinic where you need to be, which is important. So Richie doesn't end up, you know, going to get surgery that he didn't sign up for in some different area of the hospital, or whether it's somebody that makes sure that we're not stranded at an airport.
Thank you for that, because these all seem like addressable solutions, but in the context of that big trial that they're putting together, sometimes those are the details that we don't always see because we're thinking about the payers, we're thinking about the regulators, we're thinking about the site, we're thinking about the contracts, and it's a great reminder that these all have real life consequence for real life people because it's time to get real. Christine, any thoughts on, you know, how we're addressing accessibility, how we could be doing better?
We have a few trials that have started where the sponsors have tried to put a couple or 2 to 3 indications together in once, and I really hope it works out. Like I hope that by taking these similar conditions that they're able to get kind of basket approval. So if that is possible and if that works, I think it could be a new model to move quicker through things and to try to address broader populations. So there was one trial where the primary was in adults, but then in the secondary arm they added 5 other diseases and included GM1, and it was also global, which was pretty awesome that they were able to put that together. But so I think that could have the potential to increase accessibility, and I really hope that it is. So it's a different kind of accessibility in terms of trying to get an approval. So maybe there's ways that we can be collaborating. I definitely know the feeling that I believe in having a patient-focused organization that on a specific disease, but the more we can collaborate and kind of bridge the gaps as well, if there's ways to efficiently allocate resources in that way, then maybe we would have, be able to have, be more efficient in that way.
You're right. There are different layers and levels of accessibility, but none of them are unimportant. They're all important for that ultimate end goal of like the return on everyone's investment to get there. So thank you for that, Christine. Such an important topic to all of us. With that, I will turn it over to Derek.
Thanks, Amy. Just want to make sure, Rob, did you get a chance to answer that question? I think so, right?
I didn't. I was just going to very quickly say that in terms of the accessibility, I think Jen and Richie and Christine pointed out some fantastic things for people in trials or while you're going through the trial for accessibility. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is just finding what are available, what trials are available. And I think that's another level. The first level of accessibility is being able to find them. And I think it can often depend on where you're being treated, what doctors you talk to. But I think that is one of the things that I've heard time and time again over the last several years of just knowing what trials are available, when they're enrolling, and having that be a resource that is more widely available and easily accessible.
Thanks, Rob. Before we move into Q&A, I know we're coming up on a couple more minutes, but Kyle, anything else to add on accessibility for clinical trials?
I was just wanted to echo Jen's comments about having someone to call. It's so important, especially with travel for our community and lots of communities that have mobility issues. It's not a small thing to leave the house sometimes, and getting all the way into the doctor's office, much less just leaving the house. So I just think that we just need to keep that in mind, especially with communities that have mobility issues. Like, it just makes sense, right? So that's all.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Sonia, anything we need to do fancy before we move over to Q&A, or can I go ahead and just ask our panelists our questions?
Well, let me just remind our audience that they can continue to send in their questions by using that questions window located on the right-hand side of their screen, and everyone here will try to answer your questions. So I'm just going to leave it to Derek and Amy. As you see, there was a bunch of questions that came through, so I'm going to hand it back over to our host to moderate the Q&A. And I'll see you at the ending.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Yes, quite a few questions. We've been probably seeing our heads move left and right as we look through the chat for the questions. I'll kick off the first question, and then Amy, I'll let you ask the other question we kind of nominated behind the scenes.
Sure.
So the first question that we received, the message of consolidating and sharing data is well received, but how do sponsors approach the right advocacy group in certain therapeutic areas, as there are several sometimes? So I guess there's lots of different, sometimes there can be a lot of different advocacy groups focused in the same disease space or the same indication, but might have differing focus areas. We alluded to a lot of those focus areas already. So should sponsors play a role to get advocacy groups together? What is the best approach? And what are your thoughts and ideas on that? So I'm going to just pick on somebody based upon your smiley teeth. I think, Jen, I'm going to pass it over to you for this first question.
I appreciate it, Derek. I was smiling because this is always a challenge. This is a challenge from the patient community side, and this is a challenge from the sponsor side. And I've now had the pleasure of experiencing the challenge from both sides. So what I would say is, hopefully, if patient advocacy groups are doing it the right way, you know what their mission is. And so as a person working in industry, my first idea is to look at that patient advocacy organization's mission and make sure it's clear. Some advocacy organizations are really focused on serving patients' needs. So housing, adaptations, access, making sure they can buy groceries and providing computers to the kids, right? So that's probably not an organization that you're going to ask to help with things like data and registries. But then you might have organizations that are really big on work on the Hill, They're really big on engaging with the FDA. They've done that PFDD meeting. That's probably your target for that data and incorporation. So really follow their lead. Whatever they say that their message is, that's who you go to for that, and you hope that you're finding the right one. I will also say that you want to engage in some level with everybody. Every organization has that lived experience within their patient community. And I would even challenge you to go outside the patient advocacy organizations and get that input from people that are not necessarily affiliated, because it's really good insights that you can get just from that patient opinion leader. I'm not necessarily affiliated with a Duchenne organization. I attend all the events. I'm not anybody's board or anything like that, but I still have some experiences with Duchenne that I can share with a company. And then the last piece that they asked is, should the company be responsible for bringing these groups together? I think anybody that has a way to bring groups together should try to do that, because everybody has perspectives. So things like FDA advisory committee meetings or PFDD meetings, things where you're the sponsor and you're the person providing the resource or the funding, you do have a little bit of pull to say, hey, community, it really is a better look if you all have a similar mission or voice. So maybe for this one initiative, let's all come to the table. It's not always possible. I've definitely seen it go awry, but I think you should start with sort of that understanding that everybody has a similar mission. We all want safe and effective drugs. So let's pull it together, and don't make any assumptions about who's going to be your expert. All comers.
Thanks so much, Jen. I think that really checks all of the questions that one particular participant had. Instead of kind of going through round robin and pointing on somebody to add if they might not have anything to add, I guess by a show of hands, does anyone else have anything they want to add to that question? In particular, maybe even going it a little bit further around sponsors playing a role of getting these groups together, or we've had some sponsors being interested in supporting the development of a new group in a community that might not have an already existing group. So perhaps we can add on that question to, if I can put some words into that participant's mouth. Anyone care to add anything else that I can call on?
Yeah, I'll add on, Derek. This is Richie. So just keeping in mind that it's not necessarily going to be a quick process to build those relationships. They can't be transactional. Advocacy and relationship building is a process, right? So it's similar when someone comes to the worldwide team and they ask about KOLs, and your medical director kind of laughs and is thinking, well, it took me 18 to 24 months to build these relationships with key opinion leaders, right? You have to establish trust and rapport and credibility. Same thing. So that's the only thing I would add there is just remember, good intentions and wanting to work with the advocacy groups alone isn't enough. You have to establish that the trust and buy-in as well.
Thanks so much, Richie and Jen. Anyone else care to add a little bit more to that first question?
Okay, I would definitely say. I would definitely say that if a sponsor is really engaged with the multiple patient groups, if they hold any activities, they even if it's a tour of like the gene therapy facility or whatever it is, or even simply the regular check-ins, there's probably a place for an individual check-in. And then if you have a broader meetings, it's on a regular basis, it's an opportunity for that a sponsor can provide to educate all the groups at once and interact with them, if there are those opportunities, barriers or misunderstandings hopefully might come away a little bit. The more you interact with people, then maybe certain things will improve amongst the groups. So
yeah, thanks, Christine. Definitely hearing communication and transparency, regardless of how many groups there are that you might have to interact with. And it hasn't been lost on me what you said earlier about really being actionable in what you choose to say. Words are not enough. So I think that's an very powerful phrase that you left with us today. Amy, do you want to go ahead and kick us off for probably our last question? We'll see how much time we have left.
Yeah, you bet. I think you're probably right about that. It's got a different flavor to it. So We all know we would love for clinical development to be ever more successful, happen at a faster clip. The question is, speed of enrollment is crucial for the sponsors and the CROs, I would say also for the patient communities. For the last year, the change in the landscape in Central and Eastern Europe due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the question is what destinations have become replacement for patient recruitment? It's a context I hadn't thought of it quite that way before, because it's true, we all recognize that, and there are now regions where we had been very productive in clinical development that are no longer available for clinical development. I don't mean to minimize what the residents of those countries are going through, but the impact of clinical development. So what are the replacement locations? It's a tricky one, and I think I'll take the same approach you did, Derek. I'm sure you have thoughts, I have thoughts, but I'd first rather hear from the panel if anybody has thoughts you want to share on that, by a show of hands. All right, Christine.
Yeah, go for it, Christine. Apologies.
Oh, I recently heard about a sponsor who has a humanitarian program, and they, when the war broke out, they tracked down every person their therapy and found out their new location to assist them with getting access to the drug again. So if anyone makes that kind of monumental effort, then they would know where all the people went. So maybe, and maybe somehow that could be an interesting data point for people who are wondering exactly where did all the people from Ukraine go.
It's a great point. It's a really great point. And I'm sorry I was a little confusing. I want to calling on people. Richie, I'm still very interested in hearing what you have to say here.
Yeah, no worries, Amy. I'll keep it brief. I thought a lot about site and country planning and strategy when I worked for a couple CROs prior to the war in Ukraine, but often we'd be looking at competition for the same patient populations, the same key opinion leaders for names on poster presentations and abstracts. So I spent a lot of time talking about the rationale and all of the fantastic reasons to look at Asia Pac, Latin America, certainly Eastern Europe for all the reasons we just discussed, is a little bit more challenging. But coupling the regulatory timelines and marketing considerations with a look at epidemiology, the landscape of competing trials, and just how many doctors are out there looking to participate in research that don't have as many options, and similarly, how many patients are in these geographies that could really benefit based on the prevalence of disease but don't have clinical trials or access to quality care.
That's awesome. And I want to just use this as a chance to wrap us back to the beginning, that is a great example of having your natural history as a community can do wonders for drawing clinical development toward your local region, or at least including different regions and making them all, just very attractive for that next development program. Great points. I see that we are almost to the bottom of the hour. Any final thoughts before I pass the microphone back to Sonia? Well, if not, I do. I have final thoughts, which is thank you. Thank you for what you do all year, every year. Thanks for coming and spending some time with all of us today, hot on the heels of what I know was an exhausting month. So thank you.
And I would just like to say thank you very much, everyone here on the panel and our hosts, Amy and Derek. And thank you very much to our audience members for sending in all those great questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of this webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Worldwide Clinical Trials will follow up with you after this presentation. And if you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that are on your screen. And there's one there for Derek and Amy. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, give me a few seconds. I'm going to send you a link in your chat box, and you'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link, and also share that link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us again in thanking our hosts and panelists for that very insightful discussion and for answering all your questions. So thank you very much, everyone. And there's their smiles. Okay, we hope you found this webinar and actually discussion very informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator on behalf of the team here at X Talks. We thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, Amy. Bye, Derek, Rob, Richie, Jenny, Kyle, Christine. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.